If you've been paying attention to politics at all in the past few years, you've probably heard of a term called critical theory. It's a pretty new idea that people haven't really talked about that much. It's kind of popped up here and there with terms like critical race theory or critical gender theory being thrown around. But not many people seem to know what it actually means. And so today I want to explain exactly what critical theory means. What does it mean for you and I? What does the philosophy believe? What do the founders of critical theory believe? Who are the founders? What does it plan on doing? What do I think of critical theory? A lot of questions to answer, and today we'll answer every single one of them. So, let's start with the most basic one. What the heck is critical theory, and why are people talking about it? Critical theory is best understood in the other word used for it, neo-Marxism. Neo-Marxism and critical theory are the exact same things. They're interchangeable words for each other. And to understand neo-Marxism, you really have to understand Marx himself. What was Karl Marx's philosophy that he laid out in the Communist Manifesto? Well, specifically in the Communist Manifesto, he laid out a worldview of class oppression. The idea that there's a narrative in the world, and that narrative is that there's an oppressor and an oppressed class, and that the oppressor class is the rich bourgeois, and the oppressed class are the proletariat, and that the bourgeois oppress the proletariat using a special form of property known as capital, and that the whole goal of our revolution is to destroy capital, and that we have to create a revolution in order to end this oppression, in order to destroy the capital, in order to destroy class lines, right? It's this idea of just continuity. We have oppressor, oppressed, and because of that, we have to create a revolution to destroy the property that the oppressor has that oppresses the people. And this framework is really what the critical theorists believe. It's just they remove the class aspect of it and they insert whatever aspect they want. So you can do this with quite literally anything. You can do it with gender, for example. You have an oppressor gender and an oppressed gender, and the oppressor gender has a certain property. So you have the oppressor males and the oppressed females, and the oppressor males have the property of toxic masculinity. So we have to create a revolution in our society in order to destroy toxic masculinity. You can do this with race for critical race theory. You can say there is the oppressor white people and the oppressed African Americans, and the oppressors have a property known as whiteness that they use to oppress the African Americans, and we have to create a revolution to destroy whiteness. That's critical race theory. You have critical legal theory, which is you have the innocent and the guilty, and the innocent oppress the guilty using a certain property called criminal justice. So the police are oppressive, prisons become oppressive. You have all of these different ideas you can get. Even being normal itself under queer theory is oppressive. Normality is the property by which the abnormal in society are oppressed. So you have so many different ideas you can just insert into the former Marxist system. And this is why we call it neo-Marxism. Because the whole point of this philosophy is to expand beyond Marxism. It's to take that Marxist framework of the world and how the world works and apply it to, well, everything. So where did this idea come from? Who were the people who created this philosophy? The answer is the Frankfurt School. The Frankfurt School was a school in Germany that specifically studied society. The main man in the Frankfurt School that everybody knows about, and where most of the ideas for critical theory came from, was Herbert Marcuse. Critical theory itself was coined by Horkheimer, but Herbert Marcuse was the founder of critical theory. He came up with most of the big ideas in his book, The One-Dimensional Man. And in The One-Dimensional Man, he essentially argues that capitalist society, or industrial society, has created a one-dimensional man. The one-dimensional man has no expression of himself beyond the society. The society is a trap for him. And so we have to create this revolution to escape the society. But Herbert Marcuse realizes that in a capitalist society, the former middle class and working class that Karl Marx talked about as the revolutionary base can't exist. Because in a capitalist society, the middle class are doing pretty well for themselves. They're certainly not starving. And unlike a feudalist system, they aren't being particularly oppressed by nobility. So in capitalism, the middle class do, frankly, too well for Herbert Marcuse to be able to use them for the revolution. And so in order to create a revolution against this oppressive, one-dimensional society, Herbert Marcuse started looking elsewhere. And where did he go? Well, he went to the ghettos, he went to the prisons, he went to all of the places that people were being excluded from in society. And so he came up with this idea of getting a coalition of people who were formerly not recognized under the pure class system. But going beyond the class system, you can apply Marxism to so many different areas. And this really continues with his students, like Kimberly Crenshaw, who's still alive today, who created critical legal theory, and who also created the idea of intersectionality, the idea that you can stack these subgroups, right? You don't just have to have critical race theory. You can have all of the subgroups, all of these oppressed groups, all of the marginalized, as would be the language in critical theory, come together to form a minority-majority coalition. You had a coalition of all of these minority groups, all of the marginalized communities, and if you can coalesce them, you can create a large enough contingency base in order to create the revolution that Herbert Marcuse and Karl Marx were talking about. Remember, the whole point of neo-Marxism is to create a revolution, and not just any kind of revolution, a perpetual revolution. A perpetual revolution specifically comes from the idea of Mao's continuous revolution. Because Chairman Mao realized something when he was doing the Chinese Revolution, the Communist Revolution in China, which is that the initial revolution under Lenin in Russia did not have the same communist success purely because it wasn't continuous, and that in every area of society, we need a revolution, and it needs to be perpetual. We need to keep the revolution going so that we can solve every conflict that humans have through revolution, because revolution is the only solution under Marxism. And so Mao comes up with this idea of perpetual revolution, and this is exactly what the neo-Marxists are trying to achieve, exactly what the postmodernists are trying to achieve. And so you go from Kimberly Crenshaw to, let's say, Angela Davis, who creates critical feminism. And so you have all of these descendants of Herbert Marcuse who are basically trying to add on to the coalition. Because if you can create a large enough coalition, then you can overthrow the society. At least that's what they thought. But that wasn't really enough to overthrow society. Because no matter how many groups you add into the pile, that doesn't matter if you don't have an actually active base. I can say that, let's say, the African American community is on my revolutionary side, but it doesn't matter if only 5% of them are. I need 100% of them to be on my side for this coalition to work. And this idea really comes from Antonio Gramsci. Gramsci believed fundamentally that there was a problem that we had, that the neo-Marxists could not actually create a proper revolution until they had the institutions of power, specifically because society, as he would say, reproduces itself. This is his problem of reproduction. The idea that each society fundamentally has its own philosophy and ideas that it's based on. In America, we would say something like freedom and equality and justice under the law. These ideas kind of hold together the society. And as such, we need some way to destroy those ideas. But the problem under Gramsci is that the society reproduces itself. We educate people under these ideas. We hold mock votes in schools in order to show everybody how democracy works. And we prove to everybody how freedom is good and how a balanced government is necessary. And so you learn all these things in school and education, in the institutions, not just education, but the churches, the government, basic social clubs. All of these come together to reproduce society. So what does Gramsci do? Well, he has this idea where you essentially can change all of that by taking control of the institutions. So long as you take control of the institutions that reproduce society, you can change those reproduction methods, like education, in order to create your ideal society, a revolutionary state. And this is where the phrase, the long march through the institutions, comes from. Another man named Rudi Dutschke is the one who coined that term. They didn't really have much of a connection between each other, but they had parallel ideas. They were both thinking along the same line, that we need to take control of the institutions such that we can reproduce our version of society, a revolutionary society, a critical society. Because Gramsci doesn't say that what we need to do is go in and just teach everyone Marxism. He's smarter than that. He fundamentally believes that what we need to do in order to create a revolutionary society is to teach people to fundamentally critique their society, to constantly be thinking critically about why their society is doing things wrong, why their society is doing things bad. Because so long as they think that their society is wrong, then they'll have the revolutionary mindset, whether or not they've read Das Kapital or the Communist Manifesto. So how did this go? How did Gramsci's project end up? Did the Frankfurt School end up indoctrinating the world? As it turns out, they did manage to get through the institutions, specifically the institution of education. And they did this with the help of one man, Paulo Freire. Now, Paulo Freire was a critical pedagogy expert. Pedagogy just being education. This was a teacher, basically, who studied education methods and came up with his own method of critical theory, this being critical education. He specifically believed that all education is political, and so he needs to use the institution of education in order to develop a political attitude that would help foment a revolution. And he came up with a method to do this. He calls it codification and decodification. And codification and decodification are these complex methods whereby you attach certain emotions to political topics and then expose those topics to children or students, and then explain how those are contextualized within their lives to further create a connection of political attitude to basic education. So really basic, easy way of doing this or thinking about it is math. Let's say I'm teaching 2 + 2 = 4. I might say, well, I have 2 Oreos and you have 2 Oreos. If we put them together, how many Oreos do we have? Oh, 1, 2, 3, 4. We have 4 Oreos. Isn't that amazing, right? That's like a very basic method of teaching addition. But let's say we did this. I have 2 Oreos and you have 2 Oreos. But Timmy doesn't have any Oreos. Isn't that sad? Isn't it bad that we don't all have 2 Oreos? Wouldn't it be better if the government gave us 2 Oreos? Oh, but the government isn't giving us 2 Oreos. This is a problem, so we're going to problematize it. Now we're going to connect it to the children. Now we're going to teach them politics through what is essentially a very innocuous math lesson. This is the method that Paulo Freire came up with. He specifically created a method of connecting politics to basic education so that we could indoctrinate students with the new neo-Marxist ideology and take them out of the reproduction of society. And this isn't some conspiracy theory, this actually happened. Isaac Gottesman writes about this in his book, The Critical Turn in Education. He is a critical theorist, and he specifically talks about the history of how the Marxist revolutionaries moved from the streets in the 60s to the classrooms in the 70s, and they infiltrated all of the educational institutions so that they could teach this political method. So that's what critical theory really was. Critical theory is and was a method by which the Frankfurt School and the neo-Marxists could create a new revolutionary base because they realized Marx's class systems were not working in capitalist societies. And so we need to recreate a base. And using the Freirean method, we need to reinvigorate them so that this new coalition will be a strong and active one that will help overthrow the society and create a perpetual revolution. That is the idea of neo-Marxism. That is what critical theory believes and what critical theory wants. So, I did say I was going to get to my opinions on this, so let's do that now. What do I think of critical theory? Critical theory is evil. Critical theory is the most evil ideology I maybe have seen in my life. This is such a terrifyingly evil ideology because it sounds so logical, doesn't it? Right? We're going to take this logical method and we're going to apply it to different areas of oppression. And look, African Americans have been oppressed in the past. Are you saying they haven't been oppressed? Women have been oppressed in the past. Are you saying they haven't been oppressed? It's using this logical framework and using past oppression to push for a new narrative, to push for Marxism, without doing anything to actually alleviate oppression at all. Think about it this way. Let's say African Americans were being oppressed by white people in the current day and age. The critical theorists were right, there is some sort of class conflict. In what world is a revolution the proper method of eliminating that kind of oppression? Specifically, a revolution to destroy whiteness, as the critical race theorists would say? This is insanity. This entire project is insanity. All it is a bunch of people who worship revolution, who salivate at the thought of killing their neighbors and at creating this bloodshed and chaos in the society. That's all critical theory is. It's a bunch of worshippers of complete war, total civil war. These are people who hate society. These are people who want to see society burned to the ground, and they will use any excuse to do that. So they come up with this logical method, this beautifully rational method of exactly why society needs to burn to the ground. And then they reinvigorate you by indoctrinating you in the education system, and then they tell you you have to go fight for a revolution because certain people we claim are oppressed will somehow be better after we slaughter the opposition. This is insanity. If you think I'm being hyperbolic here, just look to the communist revolutions. Remember, neo-Marxism is just broader tent Marxism. So, what happened in the actual Marxist revolutions? Well, in the Russian Revolution, they gathered up the people who they thought were the problem and they shot them. In the Chinese Communist Revolution, they gathered up the people they thought were the problem and they shot them. In the Cambodian Revolution, they gathered up 20% of the population and they shot them. This is a recurring theme among Marxists, and if you think that they'll stop now just because they have a new name, you're kidding yourself. Critical theory is fundamentally evil. It teaches people to look at each other not as if they're individuals, but as if they have certain properties. To look at a person who's white as if, oh, it's a white person, instead of it's an individual with a different skin color than I might have. It's an individual with a different sex than I might have. It's an individual with a different sexuality than I might have. Instead of looking at people as individuals, we look at people as collectives. And because of that, we think there's something inherently wrong with them. That is an insane ideology. Critical theory seeks to do nothing but divide us in order to destroy our society. That is the stated intention of critical theory. It is fundamentally evil. It is fundamentally wrong. And all of its proponents are fundamentally evil. They want to destroy society. That is their goal. And frankly, if we keep letting them, they will. So, how do we fight against this? Well, it's best to stay informed. So I recommend you actually read their books to understand what they're saying. I mentioned a few, One Dimensional Man, The Critical Turn in Education, but there are other books you should be reading to make sure that you know exactly what they're saying. James Lindsay has a couple books out that he talks about critical theory and the advancements of critical theory in the modern day and age. There are plenty of books about critical theory out there, so just make sure you're constantly reading to know exactly how to defend yourself against it, or if you're one of the evil proponents of critical theory, how to continue spewing your evil ideological trash. Remember, knowledge matters, and the more knowledge you have to equip yourself in this modern day and age, the better off you will be to survive. So, thank you for listening.